So I want you to imagine an empty podium, a microphone is live, there's this massive crowd waiting, but the speaker is just never going to arrive.
Right, because the speech they were supposed to give is sitting in a drawer somewhere.
Exactly. Locked away because the organizers of the event read the draft and just completely panicked.
Yeah.
They decided the words on those pages were, simply too dangerous to be spoken aloud.
It's an incredibly potent image. I mean, you have this total suppression of an idea at the exact moment it was meant to be unleashed.
Yeah, it really is. And welcome to today's deep dive, where we are tackling a massive, really complex question today. We're looking into how one of the most rigidly hierarchical systems in human history somehow managed to survive the birth of a modern democracy and, well, the rise of global capitalism.
Right, we're talking about the Indian caste system.
Yes, and our guide through all this is Arundhati Roy's really expansive, provocative essay called The Doctor and the Saint. It's actually the introduction to the annotated critical edition of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's seminal 1936 text, which, as it happens, is that very speech we just imagined, the one that was never delivered. It's titled Annihilation of Caste.
And the paradox of that text is just staggering,
Yeah.
because today Annihilation of Caste holds this curious distinction of being like one of the most obscure, yet simultaneously most widely read political books in India.
Which is wild to think about.
Right. It's been kept alive for decades by these small, independent presses, just passed around and read fervently by the very people it sought to liberate.
Okay, let's unpack this, because we really have to start with the origin story of the text itself. Like, how does a book end up existing as a speech that was never spoken?
Well, it takes us back to 1936. There was this Hindu reformist group called the Jat-Pat Todak Mandal, which translates to the Forum for the Breakup of Caste. And they invited Dr. Ambedkar to deliver their annual presidential address in Lahore. Ambedkar, I mean, he was a giant of intellect. He held degrees from Columbia University and the London School of Economics.
Right.
But crucially, he was born into the Mahar caste, which was considered an untouchable caste.
Right, so he is someone who has literally lived the reality of being at the very bottom of that hierarchy. And this anti-caste group invites him to be their keynote speaker.
Exactly.
But then he sends them the draft, and according to the essay, they find it unbearable. I mean, it's almost comedic in a way. It's kind of like hiring a demolition crew and then being absolutely horrified when they show up with sledgehammers.
That's actually a perfect way to put it, because they asked for the text in advance so they could print it. And when they read it, they realized Ambedkar wasn't just going to, politely criticize the social practice of untouchability.
He went way further than that.
Oh, yeah. He systematically dismantled the foundational religious texts, the Vedas and the Shastras, the very texts that sanctioned the system in the first place. So the group demanded edits. They specifically asked him to remove the references to the Vedas. And he just flatly refused. The invitation was rescinded, and he ended up printing 1,500 copies of it at his own expense.
But logically, I'm trying to figure this out. If the group inviting him was already anti-caste, I mean, it's literally right there in their name, why did they panic when he went after the root texts?
Well, because it exposes the fundamental chasm between what you might call the reformer mindset and Ambedkar's radical mindset.
Okay, what's the difference there?
The reformers wanted to fix what they saw as symptoms. Right. They wanted to clean up the edges, stop the extreme cruelty of untouchability, but crucially preserve the religion and the overarching social structure.
I see.
But Ambedkar argued that you cannot treat the symptom without destroying the disease. And the disease, to him, was the ideological foundation that created what he so brilliantly called an ascending scale of reverence and a descending scale of contempt.
An ascending scale of reverence and a descending scale of contempt. That phrase is just brilliant because it explains exactly how a hierarchy polices itself.
Right.
Because it's not just a simple binary, is it? It's not just oppressors at the top and the oppressed at the bottom.
Not at all. It's an interlocking ladder. So if you are on, say, the fourth rung from the bottom, you might be oppressed by the people above you, sure. But you derive your social worth from oppressing the people on the 3 rungs below you.
So everyone has a stake in the system.
Exactly. You have a vested psychological and social interest in maintaining the ladder. And that's why a unified rebellion from the lower castes is so difficult to orchestrate. The system is fundamentally designed to keep them divided, basically guarding their own micro-privileges.
Man, that is dark, but incredibly effective.
Yeah, and Ambedkar saw that clearly. He knew you can't just ask people to be nicer to each other. You have to literally shatter the ladder.
Which brings us to the present day. Because if Ambedkar was diagnosing this deep self-policing mechanism way back in 1936, we really have to look at how it functions now. Right.
Because to a listener today, an outsider, modern India is this tech-forward capitalist democracy. The general assumption is that capitalism and urbanization, they naturally iron out these ancient wrinkles.
Well, Roy's essay totally shatters that assumption with some truly chilling statistics.
Yeah, these were hard to read.
They really are. According to the National Crime Records Bureau data cited in the text, a crime is committed against a Dalit every 16 minutes.
Every 16 minutes.
Yeah. Every day, more than 4 Dalit women are raped by those from privileged castes. Every week, 13 Dalits are murdered. And the really scary rule of thumb noted in the text is that only 10% of these crimes are ever even reported.
It's staggering. And Roy grounds those numbers in the 2006 Karlanji massacre, which I think really underscores the economic reality of the violence.
Yes, the story of Sarika Botmaj and her family. Right. They were brutalized and lynched, but what the essay points out is crucial is why it happened. It wasn't just like blind, random prejudice. She was educated, she asserted her land rights, and she demanded an electricity connection.
Exactly. She was punished for upward mobility.
Right. She threatened the local economic hierarchy. And then the justice system subsequently erased the role of caste in the crime entirely, just treating it as a standard revenge killing.
It perfectly illustrates how the system adapts to neutralize threats, right? And the sources show it adapts on a macroeconomic scale, too.
How so?
Well, Roy's research points out that caste has essentially just merged with modern capitalism. If you look at the recent lists of India's top dollar billionaires, you'll find the vast majority of them are Vaishyas, which is the traditional merchant caste.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they own the ports, the mines, the telecommunications networks. It's a huge concentration of corporate wealth.
And then, on the flip side of that massive corporate boom, the essay notes that 90% of the government sweepers are Dalits. There are officially 1.3 million people forced into manual scavenging. The text mentions that the Indian Railways alone has over 170,000 open discharge toilets where, human waste just falls directly onto the tracks.
And it is cleaned by hand.
Cleaned by hand, exclusively by Dalits.
Yeah.
But hold on, let me play devil's advocate here.
Yeah.
Doesn't the modern corporate world naturally disrupt this over time? I always think of urbanization as this giant blender.
A blender, yeah.
People move from small villages to these massive cities. They get jobs in glass office buildings. They ride the exact same subways. Doesn't the reservation system, the affirmative action policies for government jobs and universities, doesn't that eventually force the playing field to level out?
It is a blender, but Roy argues the blades just don't reach the bottom.
Oh, that's a great way to phrase it.
And what's fascinating here is how the concept of merit is deployed to protect the top of the blender. The sources argue that merit often acts as basically a euphemism for nepotism and entrenched generational wealth. Elite groups use it to maintain their dominance while claiming, total objectivity.
Oh, like saying, we only hire the best candidates, while completely ignoring that the quote-unquote best candidates had private tutors, legacy admissions, and took unpaid internships that someone without generational wealth could literally never afford.
Exactly that. The reservation system technically exists to counter this, but Roy points out a massive structural roadblock. According to the text, 71% of Dalit students drop out before high school graduation.
71%.
Yeah, and that's obviously not a lack of ambition. That is the result of extreme poverty, forced child labor, and deeply hostile school environments. And because you need a high school diploma to even apply for most of those reserved jobs, the vast majority are just locked out before they even reach the door.
So the system hasn't been dismantled by modernity at all. It's just been updated with a new operating system.
Precisely.
Which means we really have to look back at the architects of that operating system. And to do that, the sources pivot to the foundational ideological battle at the very birth of the nation. It's this massive clash between two colossal historical figures.
Right. Dr. Ambedkar, who the essay frames as the doctor, and Mahatma Gandhi, framed as the saint.
So let's talk about that collision, because it was a collision of entirely rival utopias, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Gandhi envisioned a future for India that he called Ramaraja. It was this nostalgic, mythical village republic. In his writings, he idealized the concept of self-sustaining villages where people followed their ancestral occupations and earned what he called a regulation wage.
Okay.
He actually believed the caste system minus the extreme physical practice of untouchability, of course. But he believed the structure itself was the genius of Indian society that kept it from fragmenting.
While Ambedkar, who had actually survived village life at the bottom of that exact hierarchy, viewed it completely differently.
Very differently.
He called the Indian village, quote, a sink of localism, a den of ignorance, narrow-mindedness, and communalism.
Yeah, he didn't mince words.
Not at all. He wanted absolutely nothing to do with it. He looked to Western modernity, massive urbanization, and heavy industrialization as basically the only viable vehicles for justice.
Right.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Because to a modern listener, Gandhi sounds almost like a contemporary eco-warrior, right? Like he's dreaming of a pastoral, sustainable commune. While Ambedkar sounds like this pragmatic industrialist. But if we think about Gandhi's pastoral dream for just a second, how does a village actually function if everyone is legally or socially locked into their ancestral occupations? There's a very dark side to that romance, isn't there?
A deeply dark side, which Roy highlights by looking at how exactly Gandhi expected that system to be maintained. Gandhi's economic model relied heavily on a concept he called trusteeship.
Trustee.
Yeah. This was the idea that the wealthy elite shouldn't be overthrown or even heavily taxed. Instead, they should just voluntarily act as moral guardians of the poor, holding their wealth in trust for society.
Okay, that sounds exactly like how we talk about billionaire philanthropists today. We let them amass infinite wealth and just cross our fingers that they donate it to good causes rather than, enforcing systemic equity.
And the result back then was just as predictable. Roy's text points out that Gandhi never seriously confronted Indian industrialists or the landed aristocracy. In fact, he was actually funded by massive industrialists like G.D. Birla.
Oh, really?
Yes. Furthermore, the sources show he vigorously opposed strikes by marginalized workers. He stated that a scavenger may not give up his work even for a day, framing the cleansing of dirt as this sacred religious duty rather than what it was exploited labor.
Wow, okay, to understand how Gandhi arrived at this philosophy of labor and hierarchy, Roy's text argues we really have to look at his political origins.
Right. He didn't just manifest these ideas out of thin air in India.
Exactly. We have to trace his worldview back to the 2 decades he spent in South Africa.
And this is where the historical record Roy surfaces really challenges the traditional global narrative of Gandhi. I mean, we all know the inciting incident, right? Gandhi being thrown off a train in South Africa in 1893.
Right, everyone knows that story.
But the essay presents heavily documented evidence that he wasn't protesting racial segregation as an unjust concept in itself. He was outraged that passenger Indians, meaning wealthy merchants and professionals like himself, were being lumped in with the black African population.
Whom the text notes he frequently referred to using the highly derogatory term raw Kafirs.
Exactly. The text details how he repeatedly petitioned the white authorities to carve out a separate, elevated tier just for Indians.
Yeah, he successfully lobbied for a separate entrance at the Durban post office, specifically so Indians wouldn't have to use the same door as black Africans.
Right. And when he was imprisoned, he was apparently appalled at sharing a cell with black inmates. He wrote that they were troublesome, very dirty, and live almost like animals, and he actively campaigned for separate prison wards.
It's intense to read.
It goes further, too. Roy details how Gandhi actively volunteered his services and even formed an Indian ambulance corps to assist the British during the Boer War.
Right.
And he did it again during the brutal suppression of the Zulu Bambatha Rebellion in 1906, where thousands of Zulus were flogged or killed. He was actively seeking what he called an imperial brotherhood with the British Empire.
So wait, let me get this straight. The man who becomes the global icon of nonviolent resistance was actively supporting colonial suppression campaigns. That just seems like a massive contradiction.
It does seem that way.
Yeah.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, it actually makes perfect, cohesive sense.
How so?
Well, Roy argues that Gandhi's early philosophy of satyagraha, his specific brand of nonviolent resistance, it was never actually about dismantling a ruling hierarchy.
Oh, I see.
It was a tool of petition. It was a way of proving to the opponent that you were civilized, you were pure, and you could be trusted. He wanted passenger Indians to be elevated within the British imperial structure, not to tear down the racial hierarchy itself. He really believed in a natural order of superiors and inferiors.
Wow.
So when you understand that, His later reluctance to dismantle the caste hierarchy back in India makes complete sense. He just swapped imperial brotherhood for Hindu brotherhood.
Right, which totally sets us up for the inevitable explosion when he finally returned to India. Because you have Gandhi's philosophy of trusteeship and this gentle moral reform colliding head-on with Ambedkar's demand for radical legal entitlement.
And the collisions were incredibly visceral. I mean, in 1927, Ambedkar led the Mahad Satyagraha. Untouchables marched to a public tank to drink water they were strictly forbidden from touching. And then they publicly burned a copy of the Manusmriti, which is the ancient text that codified caste laws.
And Gandhi's reaction?
He condemned Ambedkar's actions. He called it duragraha, which he defined as a devilish force, completely contrasting it with his own soul force.
Wow. But the true climax of their battle happened at the 1931 Round Table Conference in London.
Yes.
The British were gathering leaders to discuss a future constitution for self-rule. Ambedkar goes there and demands a separate electorate for untouchables. He argued that they were as distinct a minority as Muslims or Sikhs, and they needed total political autonomy.
And we should probably break down why a separate electorate is so mechanically important here.
Yep, let's do that.
So if you just have reserved seats for a minority, but the entire general population votes on who fills them, the powerful majority will simply elect the most compliant, submissive candidate from that minority group.
Oh, that makes sense.
Right. A separate electorate means only the marginalized group votes for their representative. It ensures the leader is actually accountable to the oppressed and not beholden to the oppressors.
It's basically the difference between being given a seat at the table by your boss versus kicking the door down and pulling up your own chair.
Perfect analogy.
But Gandhi fiercely resisted this. He claimed that he alone represented the vast mass of untouchables, and he argued that giving them a separate electorate would fatally divide the, quote, Hindu fold.
And when the British eventually granted the separate electorate in 1932, Gandhi, who was in jail at the time, played his ultimate political card.
Yeah.
He declared a fast unto death unless the decision was reversed.
I always struggle with this exact moment in history. Like, why would a man who preached profound peace intentionally starve himself to death just to stop an oppressed group from securing a political voice?
Well, according to the sources, Gandhi sincerely believed that dividing the Hindu community electorally would be spiritually catastrophic. He viewed untouchables as this integral part of Hinduism that needed to be loved and morally reformed by the privileged castes, not legally separated from them.
Right.
The problem is, for Ambedkar, Gandhi's fast wasn't a spiritual exercise at all. It was barefaced blackmail.
It was a hostage situation. Gandhi was essentially holding a gun to his own head and saying, if I pull the trigger, my followers will blame you.
And that's exactly what Ambedkar realized, because as public pressure mounted and Gandhi's physical health began to fail, it became terrifyingly clear that if the Mahatma died, the backlash against the untouchable community would be genuinely genocidal.
Oh, wow. So Ambedkar was trapped.
Completely trapped.
Yeah.
He was forced to surrender his demand to save Gandhi's life. He signed the Pune Pact, essentially sacrificing the independent political autonomy of his people just to prevent their slaughter.
It's a devastating political checkmate.
It really is. And this raises an important question that echoes through literally every social movement today. Like, who gets to define what freedom looks like?
Right.
For Gandhi, freedom was a moral awakening of the privileged class. For Ambedkar, freedom was the hard, enforceable legal empowerment of the oppressed. You can't build a democracy on the moral charity of the elite. You have to build it on concrete rights.
So what does this all mean for you today? I think it reminds us that a text like Annihilation of Caste isn't just an artifact of 1930s India. It's this highly calibrated lens for analyzing how systems of oppression survive, adapt, and even thrive right alongside modern democracy and global capitalism.
Absolutely.
It urges you to look past the shiny surface of modernity in any society, whether it's glass skyscrapers, tech hubs, or corporate diversity initiatives, and really examine the underlying self-policing structures of power. Like, are we relying on the trusteeship of billionaires, or are we demanding actual structural equity?
It's a really powerful framework. But Roy's text leaves us with one final, deeply ironic twist that we just have to sit with.
Oh, right.
Because for all of Ambedkar's brilliance in diagnosing the mechanics of caste, he had a massive blind spot of his own, the Adivasis, India's indigenous tribes.
Yeah, this part was shocking.
Relying on the language of Western liberalism, Ambedkar actually described them as savages. And he hoped that Western modernity, the very industrialization he championed, would assimilate and quote-unquote civilize them.
Wow. He just couldn't see past the developmental logic of his era. And the irony today is staggering. I mean, as climate change accelerates and corporations devour natural resources, it is those very indigenous tribes who are standing as the primary barricade against the catastrophic environmental destruction. Destruction that's caused by the exact modern capitalism that Ambedkar hoped would be a vehicle for liberation.
Exactly. It leaves us with this haunting realization about the limits of any single ideological vision. I mean, what happens when the cure for one systemic injustice becomes the engine for another?
It's a lot to process. The speech that was too dangerous to deliver in 1936 is clearly still vibrating with relevance today. It forces us to ask what hard, uncomfortable truths we are keeping locked in the drawer right now, afraid of what might happen if we finally grabbed a sledgehammer and spoke them aloud.